We tend to think that paint is just paint, and I think many a times they overlook the importance of the science behind it.
Color is not static, right? It creates some sort of emotion or feelings in people.
I think this is where psychology and feng shui for interior sometimes merge.
Sometimes homeowners need to recognize this fact as well. So not everything paint can solve.
From a designer's point of view, it's not something that you can escape from.
So it feels like I'm taking a gamble.
Renovation isn't just about tiles and mood boards. It's about people and the personalities, as well as the stories that help make the decisions. I'm Astley Ng, aka The Designer. Join me for the Season 2 of the SIXiDER Show. Hi everyone, welcome to the SIXiDER Show Season 2. I'm Astley Ng, aka The Designer. And as you can see, I'm seated at this corner, not at the host seat right now. So today, we have Si Hui, who is playing host, and also because she's coming from a homeowner's perspective. And joining us today, we have someone from Dulux. Her name is Si Qing.
Hi.
Let's give some airtime for Si Qing, and maybe she can share a little bit more about herself and the work she does at Dulux.
Hi, I'm Si Qing from AkzoNobel. So I am the Senior R&D Lead for Dulux Singapore. I'm responsible for formulating a lot of the paints that you see in the markets today.
Oh, scientist.
Ooh.
Yeah, scientist. Chemist.
Yeah. So the paint that we have from Dulux is actually developed here? Or is it because specific to our region, which is like high humidity and all that? Your job is to do tweaks or something like that?
So we do have a regional team that supports the formulating of paint. So before I was in the Singapore team, I was actually part of the regional team. So that's why I took part in a lot of the formulating of some of the products that we have in Singapore.
So
now.
each formulation, is it different depending on the region?
Depending on region and also depending on the product need, right? Some product maybe need to be, for example, anti-mold. Some need to be antiviral. Some need to be matte finish. Some need to be gloss finish. So formulations will change based on that.
So it's really not fluff lah.
Of course.
Why am I saying this is just to let the audience also know. We tend to think that paint is just paint, and then of course when the paint company try to sell the paint, then they'll say that this got this anti-mold, also called the stretchable type one.
Yeah.
So it's not all fluff, is it?
It is not fluff at all. Yeah, so it's every formulation is different. Yeah, and based on the requirement of the product, like I mentioned earlier.
So I test you since it's R&D one. How many patent does Dulux have for all their paint and solvent?
Number of patents we don't track. It's not tracked by my team because we do have we are a global company, we're an MNC. So globally we do have a lot of patents which I not count. Yeah.
Okay, that's a very correct answer. Since we are talking about paint in this particular episode, right? Specifically, most people would associate colors as psychology, and I think many a times they overlook the importance of the science behind it. Is Dulux addressing that angle? It's more than just colors. There are more scientific approaches, and is Dulux doing anything about it?
So when we talk about colors specifically, right, Dulux, we do have, every year we have a colors of the year palette. Like for example, this year is shades, some shades of blue. We have an expert team in the Netherlands that sits together every year, look at the trends in the market, and then brainstorm together with architects, with experts, color experts, and select this carefully selected palette. And we publish this group of colors every year. This year is the True Blue series. So if you look at the Dulux catalog, you will see that the front page is a very nice shade of blue. And last year, our colors of the year was yellow. We also select shades that complement each other to deliver a certain type of aesthetic look to the room that might please homeowners. Color is not static, right? So it always it creates some sort of emotion or feelings in people.
And this year, This year a bit kiasu, we got 3 color. Color of the year is
So it's
colors
all-
of the year.
It's all shades of blue.
Yeah.
So they do complement each other very well. And then some people might like dark and intense, but some people might not. So that's why we these 3 colors, some is more lighter pastel kind of blue, and some is very intense and a very deep shade of blue. Yeah, to cater for different moods and feelings.
I think I read somewhere like they say blue is associated with like calmness and everything.
In the interior design world, probably from a buyer's point of view, most of the time they associate the blue to boys' room lah.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah,
Right.
but in let's say even in open spaces, because like traditionally Singaporeans, when they deal with their, let's say, their living halls and all that, they tend to try to avoid gender specific colors and go very neutral. But I think with what the color of the year for 2026, right, there's this particular lighter shade blue, right, and I find that works very well in open spaces in the living halls as well. But of course, it all depends on whether it suits the specific theme lah.
Yeah.
But I think the thing with Singaporeans is that they tend to want lighter cream colors.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just ask, I'm not sure whether you will know this, but do you all ever do research on what is the most sellable color in Singapore?
I can tell about the popular colors. So like
okay.
you mentioned, those shades of off-white, cream.
Barley white.
Yeah, these shades of whites are quite popular, especially for living room. And then some people would like to have a feature wall in their house, right?
An accent.
Yes, those shades of grey usually tends to be the more popular ones. But like what Astley said, it depends on the overall aesthetic the homeowner would like to deliver, which can be paired together with like furniture, your color of your wardrobe, the bed, your bed frame, sofa.
Or neutral or easy to blend.
Yeah.
I got a question. So right, basically my husband has very crazy ideas on like our house. He said he wants to do a pink feature wall.
Yeah. Go for it.
How do I pair that? Can please like dissuade him? Because he feels like white, it feels a bit too boring. Yeah, so he was like, I want a pop of color. Let's go crazy. Let's do pink. And then his other like idea, right, was flooring, right? AstroTurf.
No, of course, I think your husband wants to kind of make a statement, but you got to think about maintenance, longevity, and whether at the end of the day, whether you will sian or not. From a design's point of view, it's not something that you can escape from. In fact, people escape from work to go back home. So that so-called of respite and refuge is important.
Right.
But for all I know, the AstroTurf is how he associate, how he recluse himself. So I mean, it's not us to kind of say that, but I would think that it's challenging to, if you try to have a robo rock and try to mop the floor with AstroTurf, it's not possible. That's one. Two, colors like the pop colors and all that, it may not be necessarily on the wall. It can also be on accent pieces like the cushions, the sofa, the rugs, and all that. And while I think those are easier to change as opposed to like having it painted on the wall, which is slightly more permanent, though paint is something that you can also quite easily change lah. But it's something to think about lah. And I think what she mentioned earlier is that instead of on many walls, you could have it on accent wall, which is also useful because it draws you in, and paired together with the right shade of furniture, right? It can be very exciting and fun to look at lah.
So if my husband is watching this, right, you heard it, okay? No AstroTurf. No hot pink wall, yeah. Okay, so when we were talking about colours at home and everything, right? So how does the colour affect the overall vibe? And is it something that is very overlooked in the renovation industry?
When it comes to color selection for the house, it really depends on, firstly, what the house owner wants, right? And also, how does your house look like? For example, do you have like full length windows? Are you going to use warm lighting, cool lighting? So all these will also have an effect on how the color will actually look on your wall. Are you south facing, west facing window? So if let's say your living room have a lot of west sun, right? So what happens is your wall will look very yellow. At like 4 p.m., 6 p.m., that kind of timing, you look very yellow. So are you going to choose a yellow color? I think you will you look at the wall, you'll feel very tired. And then it might be a little bit overstimulating for the owner lah. So I think what he mentioned, the house, at the end of the work day, you come home, you want to rest. It should be something comfortable and inviting to you. Yeah. So I think it depends on all these variables and ultimately what the homeowner wants.
I think there's not enough understanding of color application in interior spaces. I think by and large in Singapore, because you asked whether there is an afterthought, and I think most of the time it is because if you go blend, then it will blend well. So that's one of the way of thinking. It's like you use neutral colors and all that. So they're just a little bit more conservative when it comes to that. And I think there are a few factors, like the majority of us stays in HDB flat. Ceiling height is at 2.6. Already, for some people, they already feel that it's already quite a low ceiling effect. If you introduce a lot of colors, and scientifically speaking, it does affect your psychological sensation. Like if you use yellow color walls, it actually pulls the walls towards you, and you find that it's very constricted. So most of the time, people tend to not want to use yellow color walls unless you have a very long and elongated hallway, and then you can actually paint the yellow color such that it feels a little bit more squarish. So it's those kind of situations that where colors will become very useful. But then again, most people would still rather not introduce these kind of colors because it's going to be hard to coordinate. That's one. The other one, of course, is that when you have very prominent colors, right, there's this fatigue that may be associated. Like your husband says he wants this pink color for how long? do you think he will sustain this for 5 years, 10 years? So it's not something that he can tahan. Then the other thing, I think the last point is really the psychological impact. Like for example, you go to McDonald's, you always see these two predominant colors, yellow and red. Now if you bring that to your home, right, chances are it may also help you increase your appetite. So you have a skinny problem and no problem. But if someone like me, right, you don't want to introduce those colors to your house because you end up you're always like looking for food. Yeah. So it does have an impact. You don't believe me, you think about it. Imagine you put food on a blue plate. You lose appetite. Yeah. So colors does have that impact.
If you want to gain weight?
Gain weight, yellow and orange.
Oh, yellow orange plate lah.
So that really has an impact. So imagine if you want to gain weight, then if the bowl or the plate comes in this red color, everything just looks more appetizing.
It's because it's more stimulating. Like it's a warmer color.
Yeah.
So it stimulates. Whereas like a cooler color, you feel a bit more relaxed.
Just try to imagine you got two restaurants right now. One is painted in all blue, including the signage. One is exactly the McDonald's color scheme. Like close your eyes, imagine, and then try to imagine if you want to pick a restaurant, right? Chances are you won't pick the blue one. Yeah.
For example, just now he mentioned red, right? So sometimes we associate red with like attention, fast. So therefore, red might not be a super good color for example, places of rest lah. So unless you want to create a romantic vibe. But then do you want that vibe to be in the bedroom for 5 years?
Life.
I don't know,
Cannot tahan.
Yeah.
That's actually a very good point. Where I think this is where psychology and feng shui for interior sometimes merge. I remember I had a situation where I was doing some kind of feng shui reading for my client, and I looked at the spacing, right, and that particular spot in the house, right, to activate the good qi, that room needs to be painted in red. But the owner told me that I have a teenager son who has a foul temper.
Oh.
And he said, you still want me to paint spicy salsa in this room? I said, yeah, but that's the best feng shui thing, to do. And then he said, no. He still keep challenging me. Then eventually we found alternatives. Like basically you need to introduce some fire element, but don't paint. Because if you paint, right, it's very substantial. Even if it's just one wall, right, it's still very overpowering. And in a situation like a teenager boy, he's growing, his hormones are raging, he's got a very strong tempers, then there's a color to avoid. So you see, like feng shui and psychology sometimes also play a part. Like in a sense that if it's wrong, it's wrong, and the feng shui also won't work one.
Then what is like maybe one common misconception about paint quality or performance homeowners may have?
If you're talking about like issues with regards to like paint, like defects, right? So firstly, what is causing the defect? I think the root cause need to be arrested first, lah. Yeah. So paint film is just a coating, right? A protective coating, but it doesn't speak for what is happening to the house. For example, is there a water leakage? Or like, do you have proper ventilation in a room? How are you using your bathroom, for example? So like some very common problems that we see in the market is mold growth. That's one. So where do mold growth? Usually, firstly, in the bathroom, and also near areas, near walls that have the aircon. Right, so these areas are always subjected to repeated condensation. And then sometimes people do not have an exhaust fan or window in the bathroom, or like after they use the aircon, right? In the morning when they leave for work, they just off the aircon and then they leave the house. Everything, all the windows are closed, right? They will close. So there's not enough ventilation. Moisture cannot escape. So over time, mold will grow because of the way we are using the house. Is it because of the paint that leads to the mold growth? It's not. So can paint solve this problem? Yes, we can. So if let's say you have more problems on your walls, right? You can actually wash with our SIXiDER wash, then let dry for 24 hours. Then after that we wipe it off, and then coat one coat of sealer, and then 2 coats of our Dulux mold guard. This will help to curb this mold growth from happening. But if the way you use the house is going to be the same, the problem will come back.
The bad habits and the patterns of usage.
So sometimes homeowners need to recognize this fact as well. So not everything paint can solve.
There are some claims that that the paint can perform a certain function. For example, some paint claims to be able to ward off mosquito. Some paint says that it is antimicrobial. Then I think from Dulux side, you are also saying that you guys can not just be formaldehyde free, but quite literally you guys can get rid of the formaldehyde that's in the space. Now, how do we measure this? Is this something that homeowners can easily say, or rather that we can measure and say that there is efficacy? How does one measure this?
So for the claims that we make for all our products, right, we do send them for external lab testing and verification. So for example, for our antibacterial paints, we do send them for testing against common strains of bacteria that we find in our day-to-day life, and then test it against them. For example, our Dulux Ambience All Air Clean is able to neutralize formaldehyde in the air in your home. So we send the paint for testing as well, and then it passes the China Guobiao requirement when it comes to formaldehyde removal. Actually, when we launched our Dulux Ambience All Air Clean last year, we did a dollhouse demonstration. Very exciting. So we have 2 identical dollhouses. One is painted with a conventional paint in the market, and the other one with our Dulux Ambience All Air Clean. So inside, I actually put some tiger
glue.
tiger glue, which releases formaldehyde over time. So this tiger glue, people use it in the carpentry, right? Very common material that carpenters use. So so these 2 doorhouses are enclosed separately in a plastic house, a plastic box, and then we attach a formaldehyde meter to each one. And then it's live reading of the formaldehyde levels in the dollhouse. And we show that the one with Dulux Ambience All Air Clean has very, very low to 0 levels of formaldehyde.
This is instant.
Yes, instant.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next segment, which is on color perception. Okay, so in terms of like feng shui principles, right? Can a neutral or minimalist color palette still align with feng shui principles?
Well, it really depends. So, firstly, I must claim I got study feng shui. I think 2010, I got my certificate in feng shui from Singapore Feng Shui Centre. I dabble with feng shui because it's very, very much a part of my work. So in feng shui, right, typically when we talk about interior spaces, there are 5 elements. And we try to introduce the 5 elements to a space. So ideally, you have 金木水火土, right? And ideally, in a natural space, you should have all these 5 elements. So colors is one way to manifest the element. For instance, I want to bring in, for example, water. What color? Blue. Now, if I want to bring in fire, what color?
Red, spicy red.
Red, right. Or pink color, or orange. Then if I want to bring in earth, usually it's not brown, it's yellow. It's yellow. Yeah. Earth. And then if you want to bring wood element, it will be green or brown. Because that's how you will see a tree or you will see a leaf. Right? Then if you're talking about gold, right? Gold is not orange, it's not red, it's not yellow, it's actually black.
Why?
Black or grey. Because as a mineral, gold in 5 elements usually means the mineral. And raw mineral form usually is like, it's like a rock form like that. So it's manifested in black or grey. So in a space, right, and if you're looking at a homeowner that's actually in need of certain elements, they can actually use colors to bring that out. Or depending on the element, for example, if you don't want to use red, like in the case of just now, I mentioned about the teenager boy, then you can use a light. The light can also represent fire. Yeah. So again, this has a lot to do with the interior design scheme. If it doesn't allow for a lot of the color play, then you can actually manifest it through maybe light or other elements. So in this case, the person needs wood, then you actually have plants like these, right? The person needs, let's say, a water element, and again don't want to use blue because the person don't like blue, then you can try to have maybe shelvings that are somewhat curvy-wurvy, that looks like waves. So gold element can be either in color form, which is the grey color or dark grey color, or basically in a circular form. So you see that some homes actually have the arches. Like right now, I think you see a lot of design teams that is arches. Inside the arches, they actually added, let's say, a pane of maybe yellow color. So to a feng shui guy, they will see an earth element, which is a yellow color, and then they will see the curve shape, which represent gold. So feng shui is kind of dynamic. You can use colors, but you can also use forms together as well.
So forms meaning like your furniture.
Yeah. Let me share a bit about the 5 elements in terms of forms first. If we are talking about earth, it's actually a square form. Right? If you're talking about fire, it's a triangle form. Then we are talking about water, it's wave. And if you're talking about wood, it is a long rectangular. Gold is in round form. No? Yeah, gold is in round form. So interestingly, if you want, you can go and look at the Suntec City's logo.
Oh, it's a circular. Is it?
They have multiple. The convention center actually they have one logo, but then the mall one they actually have a logo that actually has the sun. Then they got different shapes but basically all the different shapes are the 5 elements. Another thing that you may or may not have realized it is that our DBS logo. Our DBS logo, if you quickly look at it, first it's got red color.
Yeah.
Then secondly, right, it's got all this triangular shape, which also represents fire. Yeah. But then in China, they like circular shape. Just now I mentioned circular means what? Gold. Then inside the gold, right, which is like a gold coin, they have a square. And the square represents earth. Alright, so an earth in feng shui represents human. Why? 因为 when we die, right, 入土为安, humans are actually made of earth.
Also, it's like you're going back to the ground.
Correct. So the circle inside got square is basically like the people got money lah.
Oh, it's like the circle of life.
Yeah. So that's the part about this. You bring this into an interior space. Actually, most of the time it's just either shapes, forms, and colors can be utilized for the interior space. Colors will be probably the easiest because good feng shui usually most of the time what we're trying to do is like we don't want it to be obvious. We want it to be felt. Like paint is very substantial. Like I mentioned, if you want the red, you paint the red, straight away you feel it. The psychology is very strong.
Then you know how like sometimes when you paint a house, right? Sometimes the color in the showroom sometimes just doesn't match like what actually painted on the house, even like on the catalog. So for example, like my old house, like my parents' house, right? We did a renovation when I think like a second renovation. And then for one of the rooms, right, my dad decided to let's have a very nice feature wall. So he painted green. But the green that turned out, right, it looks like a green screen kind of green color. I think we were all like stunned when we came in because they said, oh, it's green. On the catalog, it looked really nice, right? But then when you actually paint it, and I think maybe the lighting also played a part. But why is it like it will look different? Like in a showroom and like on the actual, then how can you like compare? It feels like you're kind of like taking a bit of a risk that, you know, when you say, oh, I like this color, maybe a terracotta color, it looks very nice. But when you translate it back into a house, right, it may not look as nice. So it feels like I'm taking a gamble.
So the lighting in the showroom is not the same as the lighting in your house. The lighting that they use and the amount of, for your house, right, the amount of natural lighting that you will have. And in the day, this shade might look this color, but at night, in the evening, it will look a slightly different color. It's all because of the light that is coming in, right? So colors will always look different under different type of lighting. Yeah, of course, there is also this, some pigments, they do exhibit this metamerism effect, right? So whereby same pigment, but will look slightly different shade under different type of lightings. Like for example, you want to buy something online, right? The merchant take a photo of the product, put it online, you see from your tablet or your handphone, it looks this color. When you receive the actual product,
Yeah, different color.
yeah, but actually it's not the merchant trying to scam you or anything, but it's just it looks different from the phone to the actual product. And of course when the person take the photograph as well, so it will look different, the color. So for Exo Nobel, right, we choose the high quality type of pigments that will minimize the type of metamerism effect. So for brochures, right, when they print out the brochures, they you also have to view the brochure under the lighting that is in your house, right, rather than in the shop, which will also make a difference.
100% agree. When it's in the showroom setting, right, it's an interior space, the lightings are controlled. As long as the open shop, the lighting is going to be a constant. Whereas your home, right, under natural lighting, they will change colors. So depending on sunrise to sunset, then when you turn on the lights at night, if it's not the same type of lights that's found in the showroom, right, clearly you perform differently as well. Not to mention all the other factors. Colors and lighting, they bounce off each other also. So also depending on the space, whether like this furniture is very close to this, if the light hits it, there'll be some bounce off of that color onto that wall as well. So there are those other factors. Then in terms of perception, right, when it comes to selection, a very common thing is that we just base it on the book. And the book has a very small swatch size, which is like 1 inch by 1 inch kind of look. And it's very hard to visualize it in proportion. When I study interior design, we always know that anything that's smaller appear darker. And that's like a visual thing. So once it goes into a larger surface or whatever kind of appeared small would very likely actually look lighter in real life. So, and I believe that there are possibilities whereby if you're exploring with your painters and you're not sure, is to do test patch.
Yes,
do
I
test
agree.
patch.
This is the best. Because if you have a test patch at home, right, you can see at 3 p.m. it looks like this. At 8 a.m. it looks like this. You know, when I on it at night, 10 p.m. it looks like this. So that's the best way to for you to tell.
For
And
better
also,
accuracy lah.
yeah, so that you know whether you will like it and this is the color that you want. Yeah. So I want to highlight sometimes the brochure that they have a lot of colors that are just side by side together. So when you see visually like that, the other colors will also influence your. Yeah.
You need to mask off.
Yes.
Another one last factor I think is that your dad probably, when he received the catalog, right?
Yeah.
He's selecting from a curated set. In colors, the spectrum is very, very vast. That particular tone, right, that he saw in the showroom may actually be from the master palette, and it's not actually something that you see from the catalog one. And he's just looking at it like, okay, I think this is the closest, and so we're basing on that. Dulux has this master color palette, right? There are literally thousands of color inside, and that one, right, that particular very dark shade of green and all that, right, can actually be customized. If you don't see it in your catalog, right, you can actually go to the paint retailer and ask for the master palette and ask them to, customize the specific color for you.
Even if, let's say, some of the retailers, if let's say they do not have sufficient expertise to do that particular color, they can come back to Dulux and we will, my team will do it for them. Yeah, for no charge.
So if like I'm thinking of cause future house, right? So the most accurate would be to actually get that test swatch.
Test patch.
Yeah.
So you can order a small can of paint. Yeah. I know Singapore, I think it's 1 liter. Or do we have anything smaller?
No, 1 liter.
Only 1 liter. So you order that 1 liter and then you paint that one wall. But the interesting thing about our space and natural lighting, right, is this wall would perform like that. The wall that's just below the window will also perform another shade. Because this is where the light comes in. Right? So this is somewhat in the shade. And the part that's in the shade will somewhat perform slightly differently as well. What that basically means is that you don't have to waste that 1 liter. You really want, you can paint here, then paint here. And somehow or other, right, it will manifest slightly differently. But if you're doing very generic, very neutral, very safe colors, I honestly don't think it's really worth that hassle. I want to ask whether this is a myth or not. White color will turn yellow. Myth or not myth? Painted walls.
I don't think this white color turning yellow will happen in a very short amount of time. Unless we are talking about 10 years, 20 years, there's sufficient UV that's come and attack your wall in the house, then probably, 10, 20 years, I would think so, slightly different shade. Yeah. UV exposure, dust, dirt will also color your walls over time, right? Yeah. There's nowadays, the air quality is sometimes dubious. Yeah, right? So haze, we always have these problems from time to time. Not all these will also attack the wall color.
But that's my understanding of white, and largely because of aircon. Whenever we get the aircon, right, the aircon blower tends to be this white color, but after about 2 years, it turns yellow.
But the aircon material is very different from a paint film. So aircon, that kind of vent material is like plastic. So this kind, I don't think they make it in a way to that will prevent or delay discoloration. Yeah, so that I think is a slightly different technology than paint that we are talking about.
Okay, so I need to abolish that bias. I want to ask, since you are doing R&D, right? And just now we talked about there are paint that can ward off mosquitoes. Are there paint that can ward off cockroaches and lizards or not? I'm asking this for Si Hui.
It's interesting that now I hear that there's actually demand for this.
No, there's always been demand. What are you talking about? We're just waiting for someone to patent it and then have it out in the market.
Right. I think if I'm not wrong, not in Singapore, I think, but in other parts of the world, there is this anti-lizard paint.
Wow.
Yeah, but it didn't take off. It wasn't well received by the market. So this type of paints so just lost its hype Even the anti-mosquito paint, right, is also from a sales perspective, I don't think it's doing very well also. Because like I say, this kind of thing, right, paints help, but really your living habits is the one that determines, right? If you have stagnant water lying around in the house, definitely the mosquitoes are gonna come.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So paints help to a certain extent, but
it's still your daily habits, you maintaining the house.
Same for cockroaches, I suppose, right?
But I think there will still be a demand one. Maybe it's up to SIXiDES to create the awareness that you didn't know what you don't know. Now you know got this option, we can market it.
Okay, so now we'll move on to the next segment, which is on application. This one's more of a feng shui question. So if let's say, after a few years, right, I want to change my wall colors, will it affect the feng shui of the house?
In feng shui, colors have everything to do with the 5 elements. So if you are like any shortage of certain elements, and then you were advised to put that color, but after a while you see that color, you go and change, then effectively you're removing the element. No? So then in that sense, it would somewhat affect your feng shui lah. But again, even though I practice feng shui, right, I do think that it's important to be comfortable. And I think this is the part where whether you believe or don't believe, it's important that you as an occupant of the house, right, must feel comfortable. Like I said, a home is where you have refuge, you have respite, you can rest well and then recharge. And all those things I think are far more important. So if after a few years you really feel that you want a change, right, then go for it lah. Because it's also somewhat telling you that something is wrong somewhere, and that's why you need to kind of change it. And this is that's why I say feng shui and psychology sometimes can have a cross one. And that part where if you repaint and you feel better, who knows, you're recharging and rejuvenating that space. That is also good feng shui.
Then how important is like color longevity in a tropical climate like Singapore?
So I think this is at the top of everybody's minds, right? Like in terms, people want their value for money, right? They don't want to buy something that the color fade after a few months, that kind of thing. So in Exo Nobel, we do treat this as our top priority as well. So we only work with colorants and pigments that are resistant to UV and also alkalinity in the walls that might threaten the color change and variation over time.
For that, there's also this question of wearability, right? For example, Si Hui become a mother, then her daughter very naughty, always like to draw. But she go and paint the pink color wall with the washable paint. But every time the daughter draw already, right, she go and clean. After clean already, is she impacting the wearability of the paint? But I think like dark color, pink color, if it got scraped off, it's visible. But what happens? She choose barley white with the wearable paint. Then, is there a way, any indication, or like how many wipes before it starts to lose its wearability?
So for Dulux, we do have a paint called wash and wear, which we have this kids-proof technology, especially to help you to be able to wipe off this type of stains, right? Common household stains like crayons, highlighter, kind of mark, tea, coffee. This paint is able to resist this type of stain. Unless, like I mentioned just now, if let's say the stain is like from permanent marker, then it cannot.
Then is there like a warranty for paint?
There is. So engage Dulux Professional Painting Services.
And you'll know.
Then, and there is warranty.
How many years is the typical warranty?
So it depends on interior or exterior, and then the type of paint that you choose in the end. So because we do have different tier of products, right? So it depends on.
So the higher grade, the longer the warranty.
Yeah, typically yes.
I see.
Okay, so we'll move on to our not second last, another segment called
Trade confession.
My Trade Confession. So this is where we will get our trade professional to confess. Okay, so for the first question, right, what is something that people overpay for in paint but they actually don't need?
I think they need everything that you're paying for. Yeah.
Okay.
I can think of one story, which is, Singaporeans, there are a lot of buying of resale flats. Some of these resale flats are like 20, 30 years old, and those, or even longer. And the olden days, right, the plastering for the walls are not very ideal. So where wash and wear paint was introduced, right, again, that was a decade ago, because wash and wear it's not particularly new, but when it came out, and I recall that everybody was just trying to elevate, sell more premium product. But the walls are, rough, and so with wash and wear paint, right, when you paint it, there's a layer of sheen. And that sheen is just to make sure that you can wipe off stains and all that. But with the wall that is kind of rough, and then you have that sheen, and when the natural light comes in, suddenly that so-called the waves on the wall, the texture on the wall becomes very prominent.
So so depending on the state or condition of the house, right, the old house that you have mentioned, some applicator, they can provide you the option of plastering over, so that it makes the wall perfect again. Yeah, because some, I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, it depends on the homeowner. Yes, it's gonna cost if you're gonna plaster the wall before you apply the coat, right? But it depends on the homeowner. Some people can live with it. Some people would rather it to look brand new, because you already pay so much for the house, ma. No, what's a couple more for just to make it look perfect, right? And it will make it look perfect.
Why do you think that special paint, in fact, in Singapore cannot take off one?
So in Dulux, right, we actually launched quite a few years ago a range called Dulux Ambience Special Effects. In that range, we actually had a metallic finish, marble, velvet finish, all the different type of finishes that we are talking about now. However, at that time, it didn't take off, and we, as R&D, we also felt what a waste, right? Because it actually is very very pretty. A lot of people just opt for wallpaper 咯，因为太贵了。那个不是边贵哈，是人工贵啊。
Application is
the application expensive. It's not tough. So
expensive.
so yeah. So in order for painters to apply like a feature wall, right, just one wall, right, it costs the homeowner quite a bit, and hence that's why people just opt for
Wallpaper
or laminate. Those are buy ready, right, and it will look uniform. It will look the same. You can have it in whatever color you want, and then problem solved.
Why and when will we actually use something like this?
If you want the whole feel ambience of the house to come out, right, definitely paint with the effect, light bouncing off, because wallpaper is just flat.
And it's got seams, right?
Exactly.
Laminates and wallpaper still
it's
got
just
seams.
flat. But with wall, there's texture, that when light shines on it, there's certain ambience that comes out. It changes the mood of the room completely. So, but the downside is the cost lah.
What are some color trends you think, right, that need to go?
The creamy aesthetics. It's, Dune, the movie? Like sand, beige, whatever. I don't know about you, I hate sand in my shoes. I hate sand anywhere around me. I do feel like the creamy color palette is fine. But this creamy aesthetic and the curves, right, somehow came hand in hand, such that actually it creates this seamless look, right? Then it curved ceiling, where the ceiling and the wall, right, suddenly got no divider already. All right, so it becomes like this integrated look and all that. And then they had this creamy aesthetic on the walls, then on the furniture, on the floor as well. For floor, they will do this micro cement, which is also in this creamy aesthetic color. So everything became seamless. Now, when it became very seamless and integrated with all the curves from ceiling on the floor, right, there are no segregation. And I think that from an interior design point of view, sometimes you need that segregation. You need that focal point. You need to have a way whereby the eye, right, has a place to anchor, to see, and to feel that there's some depth to the space as well. So I don't think that I'm not against that, but I'm just saying that's something that needs to be well thought of, and we shouldn't just follow the aesthetic or the trend blindly because our curve is trendy and all that. And it's all over the place really. Layering is important, and sometimes all this, when you have some distinction in colors and all that, and paired with the right lighting and shadow, they create that sense of depth, and then it makes the space a little bit more sophisticated. Then when it's just one palette, right? Sure, yes, you can play with light. Sure, there will be shadows, but that variety just becomes very dull and bland.
So this is the segment where we will stir the 小天使 stir.
Small sky sheet.
Do you think that sometimes feng shui is used as a reason to reject bold color ideas?
The very, 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 very pure feng shui master, if they insist on the color or they insist on a certain position, right, they will not ban one. They will insist. And in that sense, if they say what, means what law. And bold color or not, again, like I said, if they are real feng shui master, grounded with a very deep understanding of the 5 elements, color is one way to manifest, but there's also a reason why they probably want colors as opposed to a form. Like form, for example, blue color, right? You can paint the 4 walls in blue color, but I can't ask you to draw waves or have wavy shelving throughout the whole house. That scale is not possible to do. So there may be a reason why the feng shui master want it to be in paint, because of maybe they want a very substantial amount of a certain color in the space. Then for modern feng shui masters, right, I think they'll bend the rules a little bit, because they also understand that, they comfort, how people use that space. This is not a commercial space. If you go to work, right, it's okay to be of a certain shade and color, maybe because it's corporate color, so on and so forth. But in a home, comfort very important. And I think today's feng shui master accept and acknowledges that particular part, and they try to find substitute and remedies. So in feng shui, there are actually two schools of thought. One is called the physical. The other one is actually called the symbolic. And even in this, right, there are many, many different ways to address this. Now, physical is this. Is, let's say, for example, you have a shop. In front of your shop, there's a tree. Tree blocks your shop front. That means feng shui not good. The physical thing to do is to chop down the tree, right? But they say that tree is actually some prime minister last time plant one, so cannot chop. Then how? Your shop is still going to be there. You can't move your shop, ma. So you put a sign out on the front of the tree. Then it becomes a symbol and tell people that the shop exists behind. It is not as good as the physical, but it's a better alternative than just simply cutting down the tree, because you can't. So, and at the very least, people know that there is the shop exists. So feng shui nowadays, in the modern context, has these two approaches, of physical and symbolic.
Primers are unnecessary.
False.
What is your take on this? That was quick.
Yeah, boss, you need it. So primers will help to firstly make sure your paint adhere to the substrate properly, right? And anything that is might come out from the substrate, the primer is also there to block it as well. So primer is important when it comes to painting.
So primer is the last coat?
No, first.
First coat.
It's your concealer.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's your concealer, what? Hello, I got sister, I got mother, I got wife. Of course I know lah.
Oh, okay. So primer is like your concealer first.
Yeah, so primer first, then after that your top coat.
So true or false? With primer down, actually the colors have more clarity.
In some cases, it's true, especially if, let's say, previous color it's very intense or what, and now you want a white color to come out, right?
Yeah.
Then you need the primer to block the base color from coming out, from bleeding out. Yeah.
Okay, this one is not a true or false, but I want to add on to that is that oil-based sealer versus water-based sealer, both are sealer.
Yes.
But there's people saying that oil-based sealer actually outperform water-based sealer. But in the world of where everybody talking about sustainability now, and formaldehyde and TVOCs and smell, right? Can a water-based sealer really do its job?
Water-based sealer can. But back to the solvent-based sealer, right? So solvent-based sealer, it's been in the market for so many years, and I would just like to highlight that solvent-based sealer doesn't mean it will contain formaldehyde. Dulux solvent-based sealer does not contain formaldehyde.
No TVOC as well.
VOCs, yes, but after all, it's a solvent, right?
Yeah.
I'll be lying if I tell you, no VOC, isn't it? Yeah.
Or very mild, or very, very little.
Yeah, it's just a normal solvent, but it does not contain any formaldehyde or any triggers that you need to, that will cause unnecessary alarm. It has been in the market for the longest time. And then also, water-based sealer is not something that is only come out in the market for 5 years. It has also been in the market for a long time, and yet these two are coexisting. So I believe these two complements each other, and one is better suited for some type of substrates compared to the other one. Yeah. So I think for homeowners, when you have a project that is coming, speak to an applicator. He will be the best person to advise you on what type of sealer your house will need. On our Dulux website, we actually do have a recommended system kind of recommendation there for each of our products. So it's already there, information is already there. For example, there are some specific issues that you have with the house, maybe it's a super old house. Then I would suggest speaking to
the practitioner.
So that they can help and advise. Yeah.
Do you have any advice to homeowners regarding probably choosing color or like wall maintenance, paint maintenance. Yeah. Any last words?
For me, I would think that for homeowners or even IDs, right? If let's say you have a specific problem or you have some queries, do not hesitate to reach out to our professionals with the Dulux painting services. I think they'll be more than happy to assist you. Yeah.
So for me, from a design perspective, is to not be overly reliant on the catalog. If you are really particular about certain colors, go for test patches. It is available. Talk to your ID, talk to your painters, and you should be able to paint patches on the walls that you want to see the colors. That will be a better way, and especially if you are using bold, strong colors.
I guess that's the end.
Yeah. So with that, right, we've come to this very colorful episode, specifically talking about how colors can be used in your space. So if you like this episode, and do like, subscribe, share, and tell your grandfather, grandmother, tell your husband, wife to be whatever, what kind of colors to use, and we'll hope to see you guys soon in the next episode of the SIXiDER Show. Bye.
Bye.